Hello everyone, this is our first lesson for Principles of Microeconomics. It's an introductory level course for microeconomics at the university level. I'll be using the textbook called Microeconomics by Krugman, Wells, and Parkinson. It's the 4th Canadian edition. You can buy the book from the bookstore or you can use a used copy of an earlier edition. So what is economics? We're going to start with defining economics today. Economics is defined by different economists in different ways. We have some definitions over here. The first one I'm going to go over is by Tyler Cowen. Tyler Cowen says economics is a study of selfishness and material inequality, but it has some egalitarian and civil libertarian core. We have another one from Ben Bernanke, a more idealistic approach to the subject of economics, and he says the ultimate purpose of economics is to understand and promote human well-being. However, I feel the simplest definition is usually the most accurate one, and that one is from Wikipedia, which says essentially that economics is a study of behavior and interaction of economic agents and how economies work. So what are these economic agents, or who are these economic agents? Economic agents are essentially the household, firm, and the government. Economics can be divided into two parts, micro and macro. Micro is a more individual perspective, so we are focusing on decision making of a household or decision making of a firm. Remember, households and firms are primary economic agents. Then microeconomics also focuses on how these individuals, these different type of economic agents interact with each other in a particular market. And what is the market outcome? So what is the price of apples, or what is the price of gasoline, or what's the price of an average house in our city? These are different types of markets which microeconomics focuses on individually. Microeconomics also looks at the societal outcomes coming out of these particular markets. Lastly, we will also focus on how government intervention alters market outcomes for better or for worse. And we'll look at the impact of that government intervention in a particular market in terms of whether it enhanced well-being or is it undermining overall well-being in this particular market. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, is a universal phenomena, a large-scale phenomena, often referred to as the bird's eye view of the economy. Now we are not interested in individual decision-making processes, but the aggregate impact on this economy. When all individuals are behaving in a certain way, what type of economic outcomes do we see? So we are now interested in the overall unemployment being caused in this economy because of maybe a certain shock to this economy. We are now no longer interested in the price of a particular good like apples or housing, but the overall aggregate price level. If it's going up, we call it inflation. If it's going down, we call it deflation. We are interested in upturns and downturns in this economy. Downturns are referred to as recessions, which are particularly harmful as it lead to higher unemployment. How do governments intervene in the macroeconomy? They have different types of fiscal and monetary policies through which they can try and stabilize the economy. Now, since this course is for microeconomics, we'll focus more on individual choice today. Individual choice is essentially referring to the fact that everyone must choose, whether it's the firm, the government, or the individual in a household. We all must make choices. These choices are concerning the use of resources that we have. We assume that economic agents are going to be rational, so they are not going to make irrational decisions. They always have well-defined goals, and they try to take steps in order to achieve those goals. And they also have certain values that they are adhering to. Choices are necessary because we are working with limited resources, or the scarcity problem. Resources are in finite number, whereas our wants and needs could be unlimited. This is referred to as the scarcity problem, when we have boundless needs and wants, unlimited needs and wants, but limited resources. Now, resources or factors of production, as they're also referred to in micro, are essentially referring to different type of inputs used in the production process. So some broad categories of resources are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Land, as the name suggests, is your resource which includes all type of natural resources, whether it be coming from minerals, water, fish, lumber, oxygen, etc. Then we have labor. Labor is looking at both mental and physical efforts of your labor force. Then we have capital. Capital is divided into two parts, real capital or physical capital, and then human capital. Real or physical capital would be referring to building, roads, manufacturing plants, and equipments, whereas human capital is looking at the training and skill set of your workforce. Entrepreneurship is the last category in our factors of production. An entrepreneur would be a person who combines these different type of resources of land, labor, and capital, and combines them into some type of production process, or organizes these resources into production process and earns profits off of them. Now, owners of land will typically earn rent on their land. Owners of labor will earn wages or salaries. Capital owners will also typically earn interest rate or rent on capital. And entrepreneurs who are combining these different type of resources will typically end up earning profits. So I will use the Greek letter pi for profits. Now, when we have to make choices, what are these choices determining? The questions about what, how, and for whom goods and services are being produced are often determined by the choices we make. So, for example, what determines the patterns of production? In Canada, do we produce more coffee or more cars? How much do we produce? Once we know what we are going to produce, whether we are producing coffee or cars, how much do we produce of that good or service? In this case, we are again referring to the resources that we are working with. Given the availability of resources, that will determine how much you are producing of either of these two goods. So who gets the goods and services being produced in different type of markets? Depending upon what type of natural resources we have or factors of production we have, Canada can decide to produce more coffee or more cars. How much of these factors of production we have will determine how much of coffee or how much of cars we are producing, and for whom these goods are being produced is determined by the income earned by the owners of factors of production. Whenever you make a choice, it involves a trade-off. Having one more unit of something involves giving up something in exchange for that. For example, will you study for one additional hour or should you watch a movie instead? You cannot essentially do both of these things at the same time. When we say you have to make a rational choice, it involves comparison of costs and benefits of doing something. So what are costs? The true cost of something in economics is defined as the opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the value of your next best alternative. Note, it is not looking at the value of all of your alternatives, but the value of your next best alternative. What you must give up in order to get something. Now, opportunity costs can be divided into two parts, explicit and implicit costs. Explicit would be the actual dollar layout, and implicit would be involving the value of your time. So, for example, what is the opportunity cost of going to a concert? Now, if you're going to a concert, you have two type of costs involved over here. The first one is if you purchase a ticket for the dollar value, now you cannot afford to buy something else instead of that ticket or with that money used. Secondly, what are you doing with your time? If you're going to the concert, you cannot now use that time for something else. So opportunity cost for going to the concert would be not only the dollar value of the ticket, but also the value of your time that you're giving up in order to be at the concert. So we have two type of costs over here, the explicit dollar layout and then the value of your time involved. Now, choices are not about all or nothing. In fact, rational economic agents always make choices at the margin. So what is making a choice at the margin? Margin means that we're looking at incremental changes in the use of your time. So, for example, marginal benefit would be the benefit that you get from an incremental increase in that activity. So, let's say you consume one more bite of a chocolate bar. So, what's the additional benefit, marginal benefit you're receiving from one additional bite of that chocolate bar? Or in the example of studying, what is the additional benefit that you receive from 1 hour spent on studying? Marginal cost likewise is the opportunity cost of pursuing an incremental increase in an activity. So when you increase that activity by a small amount, let's say one more bite of a chocolate bar, what is the marginal cost associated with it? Now remember, in economics, costs are always going to be opportunity cost, whether we explicitly say it out loud or not. Economists always deal with opportunity costs, explicit and implicit. So when I'm looking at marginal cost, I'm looking at the opportunity cost of producing or increasing an activity by a small incremental amount. So marginal analysis, therefore, is the comparison of additional benefit, marginal benefit, versus the marginal cost or the additional cost associated with incremental increase in that activity. Rationally, if you observe that the marginal benefit from pursuing that activity is higher than the marginal cost associated with pursuing that incremental increase in that activity, you would go ahead and pursue that activity. If marginal benefit is lower than the marginal cost associated with the incremental increase in that activity, it's more likely that you will not pursue that activity. This is what we call by marginal analysis. Decisions are always made at the margin. We do not decide between consuming a whole platter of food, but we instead start with small incremental increases in our actual own plate or on our serving dish. We can use an example of marginal analysis when we look at celebrities like Lady Gaga and Zuckerberg. What do you think they have in common? They're both millionaires, they make a lot of money, they're famous. But another important thing that's in common with both of them is that they're both university dropouts. What does that tell us? That for them, when they were weighing the marginal benefit versus the marginal cost of one additional year of schooling, the marginal cost exceeded the marginal benefit. The lost income by staying in university was humongous for both of these individuals, perceived as at least as their perception was, and which turned out to be true, and therefore they thought it's not worth their while to pursue this one additional year of education. So if the marginal cost exceeds the marginal benefit for pursuing a particular activity, you are not going to do it. However, if the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost, you'll go ahead and pursue that activity. So this is what we mean by rational economic agents making rational choices. Now, choices are very closely linked to incentives. Economic agents respond to incentives. What do we mean by incentives or responding to incentives? It essentially is saying that we will always exploit opportunities to make ourselves better off. Incentive is anything that offers a reward to people to change their behavior. It can also be in terms of a penalty. So it could be a penalty if you don't do a certain thing. So incentivizing is essentially a mechanism that is out there, which is essentially trying to change your behavior in order to do something or in order to deter you from doing a particular activity. Incentives can change marginal costs or marginal benefits associated with your choices. So governments we see often make use of incentive mechanisms in order to alter or change our behavior. So for example, which policy over here do you think is more effectively going to reduce pollution? The choices are educating manufacturers about climate change or offering them financial rewards for reducing pollution. They're both alternatives, but which one would be more successful? Let's look at interaction of individual choices. When individuals who are rational economic agents interact with each other, we often see gains from trade. What do we mean by gains from trade? Essentially, what we're saying is that when individuals interact with each other, they end up consuming more than they otherwise would have if they were making and doing things only for themselves. So an economy which has autarky and not trading with anyone else on the planet would definitely be worse off compared to an economy that trades with the rest of the world. Gains from trade are hinged upon the assumption that economic agents are specializing. What do we mean by specialization? It essentially is a situation in which every person is specializing or producing the task that he or she is especially good at performing. We'll go into the details of specialization and this model for gains from trade in chapter 2 when we look at the model of comparative advantage. When individuals interact with each other in a market platform, we see that we're moving towards an equilibrium. Remember, you're responding to your incentive. If you see an unexploited opportunity that can make you better off, you will exploit that opportunity and move accordingly. So eventually we will move to a situation where there are no further unexploited opportunities left. That point where there are no further unexploited opportunities left is your equilibrium point in that market or for that situation. So equilibrium is a situation in which now you can no longer change your behavior to make yourself better off. All such opportunities are already exhausted. Another important concept in economics is the concept of efficiency. Resources should be used efficiently to achieve society's goals. Economy is efficient or a situation is efficient when all opportunities to make some people better off are exhausted without making other people worse off. So if you have a situation in which you can make someone better off, but now that would be at the expense of someone else, you're already at an efficient allocation of resources. However, if you're at a situation in which you can make someone better off, and in doing so nobody else will be hurt, then that means right now you're at an inefficient allocation because you're letting go of opportunities. Equilibrium and efficiency are not the same thing. Equilibrium is more concerned with, have I exhausted all my opportunities to make myself better off? Whereas efficiency is looking at when you make someone better off, if you necessarily end up making someone else worse off, then that particular outcome is already an efficient outcome. Now making someone better off will necessarily make someone worse off. These concepts will become much more clear when we put them in a tangible way with the help of economic models in our subsequent chapters. Let's talk about equity next. Equity is often at odds with efficiency. Equity is a condition where, we define something as fair. Everyone should get his or her fair share. But what is fair share? Who defines fair share? Who defines equity? So there could be many different subjective analyses about equity and what should be the right definition for equity. There's no one particular way of saying that, this type of equitable distribution of resources is the right one. Self-interest, which we are looking at in individual economic choices, is often at odds with social interest. And this is primarily because the way we are defining equity in that particular economy or in that particular society. Now, normally we will see that any opportunity that makes you better off will also end up leading to an efficient outcome. So for example, you are stuck in a traffic jam on the highway in the morning commute to work or to university. Now, what is your rational choice? If you see a certain lane being faster than the others and there's no restriction on you to enter that particular lane, your rational choice would be to enter the fastest lane possible. However, once all lanes are of equal length and are moving at the same pace, it doesn't make sense to change your lanes anymore. We were facing a disequilibrium situation when we were in that lane stuck, which was slower, while we had an opportunity available to us to move into a faster lane. However, once you have moved into the faster lane and now all lanes are, relatively equal in terms of congestion and the pace at which you're moving, now have reached an equilibrium situation. In this case, the equilibrium situation is also an efficient allocation of resources. By moving into the faster lane, we have not made anybody worse off. However, not all equilibrium outcomes are efficient outcomes. Sometimes market outcomes are actually making the society worse off. By moving into a different lane, you might be making someone else worse off. And if the market outcome is not capturing that, that is a market failure. Let's look at another example. We all are leaving a carbon footprint on this earth. How do we reduce our carbon footprint? We can easily reduce our carbon footprint at the individual level by making certain good choices, by altering our behavior, moderately. Even some moderate changes in our behavior can reduce the carbon footprint. But can each one of us be relied upon to make choices that reduce the carbon footprint? Not necessarily true. Now we see a role for government to step in to ensure that choices rooted in self-interest are not undermining the overall well-being of our society. So we'll see that government can enter and change our incentive mechanisms by, imposing taxes on us or by rewarding us for good behavior and therefore trying to alter our behavior in a way that will reach overall a better societal outcome. Economics is a social science and economic analysis is often used as a policy tool. Now there are two types of economic analysis. Analysis that tries to answer questions about the way the world works, which have definite right and wrong answers, is known as positive economics. In contrast, analysis that involves saying how the world should work is known as normative economics. To put it another way, positive economics is about description, whereas normative economics is about prescription. This then leads to two types of statements that economists often make. Positive statements versus normative statements. A positive statement is what we call a what is statement. It's just simply a statement of facts. For example, the temperature outside is negative 11 degrees today. Or the government has collected $12,000 in tax revenue because of the imposition of a new tax on cigarettes. These are statements which are essentially based on facts. Whereas normative statement is what ought to be. The temperature should not be -11, it should be at least -2. Or for example, the revenue collected by the government should be at least $14,000. A positive statement is a pure scientific statement. It's falsifiable. You can easily test that statement and check if it is true or not. Normative statements are not scientific statements because they cannot be tested, because they're based on some subjective decision making or subjective criteria. So you cannot test normative statements. Now, what do economists do with the policy tools that they have in place? They will essentially discover positive statements that are consistent with what we observe in the world. So they are statements of facts. And then they will create and test economic models to see if these statements are falsifiable or not. A very particular example is the market model. So we observe that there are buyers and sellers in a market for apples, let's say, and they were going to negotiate a certain price for apples. We can test that market model and see if that price holds or not. Or is it the way that the actual market really works in accordance with the observations that we have made in the world. Another model would be the production possibility frontier, which we'll do in our next chapter. We are going to look at the concept of opportunity cost and efficiency in the framework of the production possibility frontier. So these are just some examples of how economists then work with positive statements and create models which will help us not just observe human behavior, but also help us in forecasting and predicting what happens in these markets if something changes. So that was our first basic introduction to principles of microeconomics, coming from chapter 1 and a little bit of chapter 2 of our textbook. And next we'll follow with chapter 2, which is the model of the production possibility frontier, and then the theory of comparative advantage and gains from trade.